Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the sports podcast of the Kansas City Star and KCUR. I'm Blair Kerkhoff. It's Tuesday, January 13th, and today we're talking about the Baseball Hall of Fame. Why this topic? Well, a couple of reasons. The announcement of the 2026 class is a week from today, January 20th, at 5 p.m. on the MLB Network. And our two guests today, Star columnist Vahe Gregorian and Star reporter Pete Gradhoff, have Hall of Fame votes. So do I. We're going to reveal our voting choices and talk about how we arrived at our decisions. After our discussion, I'll let you know what's on my radar in Kansas City sports this week. Hello, Vahe.
Hi, Blair. Thanks for that special hello before you talk to Pete.
Hey, Pete.
Hey, good to see you both.
Yeah, glad you're here. Yep. Yeah. Hey, so let's start talking a little bit about the process and how we got our ballots. They go to members of the Baseball Writers Association of America that regularly cover the game for at least 10 consecutive years, and there's about 400 voters. Does anybody know the exact number this year?
No.
It's about 400.
I think that number's stable, but I don't know the exact number.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say. What's interesting with it, though, and this is on my mind because somebody just pointed this out to me. You know, when we send these ballots in, you have to put your Baseball Writers Association number on there. And that number basically is a longevity number. Like you are, whatever, 138th, 247th on the list of longevity. And the reason it's been pointed out to me is I had the wrong number on mine. So I gotta find that, look that back up. But you guys are probably farther up that list than me. I was covering baseball in St. Louis for a while, but then I had a sort of an intermission between years on the Baseball Writers Association process. So you guys have had a much longer, I think, consecutive streak of years on there.
No, not as far. With me, my path is the same. I was in the Baseball Writers for about 4 years in the 1990s, and then not in it again until I think 2013 or 2014. So this is my second or third year voting in the Baseball Hall of Fame. How about you, Pete?
I think it's my third year. I'm pretty sure. I think it was 12, but you're right, 10 years. Shouldn't you be automatically disqualified if you don't know your own number, your badge number?
Well, I got a lot going on, Pete. I mean, you know, I know my license plate number. I know my social security number. I know a lot of friends' phone numbers from high school. But
all
numbers,
useful information.
Yeah, this number's just eluded me. And I looked on the wrong form for it is what happened. So,
all right. So who's eligible for the Hall? A screening committee prepares a ballot of candidates, and those candidates will have played for at least 10 seasons, and they've been out of the game for at least 5 years. And they kind of have to be good. There are 27 players on this year's ballot, 12 for the first time, including a Kansas City Royal. A player stays on the ballot for 10 years if they receive 5% of the vote each year, and a player must receive 75% of the vote to be elected to the Hall. You can vote for up to 10 candidates. So 27 on the ballot this year. You can vote for up to 10. Having had a little conference discussion, none of us voted for all 10 or used all 10 of our votes, right? We all came in under 10. There is another way into the Hall of Fame. It's through the Eras Committee. Guys who aren't elected and are no longer eligible in the way we described. Jeff Kent is part of the 2026 class through this method.
So that method, does Taylor Swift have to approve on that method? It's
Yes.
such an odd term, isn't it?
Used to be the Veterans Committee. It's called the Veterans Committee.
Yeah.
Now it's the Eras Committee. Yeah. All right. We've been doing this for a couple of years. Any general thoughts about the group of candidates, the candidates as a group, Pete? What were your kind of initial observations?
Well, I thought this year's class, the new guys who were on this year, and I don't know if you want to hold off saying the new Royal, but I just didn't think
we can say the new Royal.
Okay, Alex Gordon.
Yep.
I just didn't think they were that solid of candidates, to be honest. That's what really stuck out to me. The candidates that were there last year really, a couple of them I voted for last year didn't make it. I voted for this year, and then it ends up being a much more difficult process, I think, than I really had anticipated it would be before I ever got the opportunity to vote. It's just, there's a lot of, for me at least, there's a lot of research that goes into it. And so it's kind of tough because this is longevity we're talking about.
What I think is interesting about it is I think the floor is pretty darn good for everybody, right? But this is about the ceiling. And I can't remember if we said this while we've been talking now or informally before, but some of us are small hall guys and some, maybe see it as this guy's name should, be part of a process and keep his candidacy alive for a while, keep talking about it. What's different about this than in my case, I'm a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter. The oddity in comparison is that involves a lot of discussion voter to voter. Like tomorrow literally is the day that we have a Pro Football Hall of Fame day-long meeting to discuss the candidates. This is entirely different. This is you sit down by yourself and take a test. I mean, it's you write it down and open notebook, luckily, and you can do your research. So I just thought I'd add that point. I think it's interesting how it's the eye of the beholder a lot more. One last thought really quick is just, Blair, I'm reminded we had the opportunity to do mock bracket at the NCAA tournament some years ago. And I believe it was the former Princeton athletic director who was head of the tournament committee when we did the mock bracket. And he was talking about distinguishing between teams for the NCAA tournament. But he talked about it from the perspective of an accountant. And he said, if you torture the numbers long enough, you can get them to testify to anything. And I think there's something to that in this. There are so many different data points and ways to look at this. Some of it's numbers, but some of it's postseason performance or intangibles. So anyway, with that, Blair.
I'll pick up by saying, let's talk about the intangibles for just a moment, because it's left to the voters of the Baseball Writers Association of America to determine to what extent steroids and performance-enhancing drugs and cheating play a role in someone's Hall of Fame candidacy. They've left it up to us, And if a player doesn't get into the Hall of Fame, if his 10 years pass and he doesn't get in the Hall of Fame, then it's up to that Eras committee to consider the candidacy of players that Jeff Kent wasn't a steroids guy, but Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, those guys were on the Eras committee ballot as well and did not get elected to the Hall of Fame. We were dealing with players like Alex Rodriguez, Manny Ramirez, a couple others. And to be honest with you guys, I wish it wasn't up to me to make the decision. I wish those decisions had been made for us going in. I don't know how you feel about it.
I totally agree. I wish it wasn't, but since it is, everybody, and like you guys talked about, you fill this out solo, Yeah, I don't know about you guys. I did talk to other people that I know follow baseball for some suggestions and just get their thoughts. But when it comes to those two particularly that you mentioned, A-Rod and Manny Ramirez, for me, it's 2 strikes and you're out with the steroids. I mean, okay, you can make the case that people didn't know at the time it was the steroids, they shouldn't be taking them, but both of those guys got busted twice. And so that's why I didn't vote for them. And it's part of the reason why I'm not sure about Andy Pettit, who's also on the ballot. So, and then there's Beltran, who was part of one of the biggest cheating scandals in baseball history, right? But I did vote for him.
That's so interesting because each of these, I think, reflects a lot of thought, and yet, again, you can make cases for each aspect of this. For instance, I did not vote for Beltran last year, I don't believe, but I've just become more persuaded over time that ugly late episode in his career with that particular scandal didn't strike me as rising to the same level as what I've felt about the PEDs and other steroids. Now, I know there's been different things with different guys, and it's all subjective in the end. Let me read this, though. This is on my mind while we're thinking about this. Even though we're supposed to interpret this for ourselves, one of the voting criteria number 5 is why we're discussing all these things. Voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contribution to the teams on which the player played. Now, to me, what jumps off that page is integrity, sportsmanship, and character. And again, we're all sort of left with our own notion of how we process that. I bring that up one last time in context of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which actually has a stipulation you're not to consider anything off the field. And that's loaded and strange in its own way, and separate conversation for another time.
Listen, there are a lot of bad dudes in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And Dale Murphy is not in the Hall of Fame. And there was no greater,
better dude.
Right. Yeah. Better dude, no greater humanitarian, really, than Dale Murphy. So who was also who's on one of those, who was on the Eras Committee ballot and just didn't get voted in. Jeff Kent.
Crazy.
Yeah, I thought that was a missed opportunity there. So okay, guys, let's use this time to take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about our ballots specifically. We're back on SportsBeat KC, the sports podcast of the Kansas City Star and KCUR. We're talking Baseball Hall of Fame with voters. Pete Gradhoff, who a sports reporter for the Star, and Vahe Gregorian, columnist for the Star. We all have votes on the Baseball Hall of Fame. So, guys, I guess I'll go first. I'll throw mine out there. We each had a different number of players we voted for. I voted for 4. And my 4 were Carlos Beltran, Andruw Jones, the old Braves outfielder, Chase Utley, and Andy Pettitte. Yeah, you mentioned him earlier, Pete. Andy Pettitte, of course, the Yankees pitcher, one of the great postseason pitchers in the game's history. So those are my 4. I think you went one less.
I did. I had 3. I had Beltran, Andruw Jones, and Felix Hernandez, the former Mariners pitcher.
All right, Vahe, you got yours?
Yeah, I had...
Vahe went a little heavier.
I'm pretty generous. I had Beltran, Mark Burley, Cole Hamels, Felix Hernandez, Andruw Jones, Dustin Pedroia, Chase Utley. It's a little more expansive. I think a couple more than I had last year. I thought more about Beltran, as we spoke about earlier this year. I think the case as a player himself was always pretty sterling. I just, one way or another, managed to work through my issues with his Astro scandal stuff. Yeah, the rest, I mean, we can talk about as we want to go on, but I do think it's interesting. I think all 3 just gone to Beltran this year. Am I right about that? Or have you guys voted for?
I voted for Beltran last year.
You did?
I did too.
Yeah.
I voted for him every year I've had the opportunity.
Well, what was your toughest call? What, either your last person in or first person out?
I think for me, what was a little interesting was to try to break down starting pitchers. And it's something I think in a really big picture way that, you know, it's going to be complicated going forward. But I voted for Felix Hernandez last year. I felt like his peak was just so terrific. Mm-hmm. And that stayed with me. I guess I felt enough conviction about it last year that, you know, I had continuity there. Cole Hamels' his first year on the ballot, if I recall correctly, and Burley's been for a couple years. So sort of mixing and matching, looking at them against each other in some ways, because I didn't want to just open the floodgates, but I wanted to sort of, you know, take a measured approach. I just felt like there are aspects to each of them that made me want to include them.
How about you, Pete? What was your toughest call?
I could have easily turned in a ballot like Vahe's, to be honest. There were so many pitchers, yes. I would say Cole Hamels and probably Chase Utley or Dustin Pedroia. There were a lot of guys on the cusp, and I think we're going to discuss this, but pitching, how it's changed and what it means now compared to what it meant, say, in the bulk of the Hall of Fame years. A guy like Felix Hernandez, I looked it up, 10-year span, averaged 217 innings, 206 strikeouts, had a 127 ERA plus for some pretty awful Mariners teams, and 11 shutouts, 6 All-Star game appearances, which is, you know, I don't want to make it sound like I only look at All-Star games because it's a fan thing usually, except for pitchers. But that's kind of important to me because then you're kind of identifying guys. If you don't make an all-star game a lot, then how good were you during that time? Either there were great players playing your position. Well, in my mind, you should be one of the best players at your position for an extended period of time to be considered one of the greats of all time. And this is the Hall of Fame. It's not the Hall of Very Good.
Yeah. I liked your argument about the All-Star game appearances. At least you had good 6 first halves.
Oh, yeah. That's true.
To make it. But in Felix Hernandez's case, he's clearly deserving. He was my most difficult call on this. I had him in, I took him out, I had him in, I took him out, and I'm just glad he's on the ballot in the future going forward. There have been others like Beltran who have worked their way onto my ballot. I think that's possible to do. I think you can vote, keep someone out, and then vote him in. I'm not one of those believers, hard and fast. You're a Hall of Famer, and you either are or you're not, and that never changes. I think it does change after more consideration and more research.
I think that's exactly as it should be. I mean, I get that you want to have, form an opinion and then have conviction about it and, go forth with that, right? You don't want to just be willy-nilly. But on the other hand, aren't we sort of supposed to continue to scrutinize this? One of the reasons they do these ballots, guys are eligible on the ballot over a period of years if they get enough minimum votes to keep them going, is to provide you the opportunity to rethink it. And then maybe rethink it not just in the context of the game itself, but in the context of the group it's up against. So I like that I'm allowed to evolve.
I agree. I did not have Felix on it last year, but I had lunch with Josh Vernier, the Royals reporter, to just discuss the Hall of Fame, just pick his mind, what he thought. He was adamant that Felix. So I took probably a deeper dive than I did a year ago, and absolutely believe he should be there. And yeah, there's a lot of guys on the cusp.
I wish Felix Hernandez had been on better teams. I wish he'd been able to pitch in the postseason. Never did. No. And then you've got a player like Chase Utley who in some people's eyes didn't have the career numbers that he should have to deserve a Hall of Fame induction. But man, he was so good in the postseason. He was a great postseason player.
True.
And that helped me decide on his candidacy.
It makes a difference. It made a difference definitely for Beltran, right? He was such a good postseason player.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Fantastic.
I'm just only to linger on one specific thing, but I think this is the kind of thing we're talking about. You look at a streak for Felix Hernandez from 2008 through 2014. The most wins he had in a season was a great 2009 season where he was 19-5. The rest of the time, his records are like 13-12, 12-10. But his ERA is never over 3.5, and 3 different times it's in the low 2s. I mean, for a starting pitcher pitching 35, 37 games, I go back to your point, Blair, about if that's on a team, if that's on the Yankees, he's first ballot.
He won a Cy Young too, and I believe, and
I think that's right. I'm not sure. There's a couple of different seasons.
It was a big deal in Seattle and kind of around baseball. I felt like King Felix. You knew if somebody told you King Felix, you knew exactly what they were talking about.
Yeah,
and based on a documentary that I've seen, he was. He could not have been more gracious when he lost his perfect game to the bad call at first base. Remember that?
Yeah. 2010, he was the Cy Young.
This is SportsBeat KC. We're talking Baseball Hall of Fame voting with Pete Gradhoff, Vahe Gregorian, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. How do you guys feel about voting? Like, as I said earlier, you can vote for as many as 10. And some voters and some baseball people whose opinion I really value and trust say you should max out your ballot every year. You should always vote for 10, whether you think 10 deserve to be in there or not. You should always vote for 10. How do you feel about that, Vahe?
I think it's a really interesting question. I guess it gets at the point of why do we feel like we have to distinguish between X, Y, and Z if we've still got 3 other spots? Like, I guess I didn't have to leave out. I'm trying to think who my, last man out would be. I'm really
like a Jimmy Rollins or a.
It probably was. I'm glad you said Jimmy Rollins because it probably really was Jimmy Rollins. It was right in there. I'm just kind of scanning again here quickly.
Omar Vizquel was a heck of a player for a long time.
Yeah.
But let's say, for argument's sake, for me, it probably was Jimmy Rollins. I just felt like I did want to kind of find a line of demarcation that was there. And what's funny is I probably broke down Jimmy Rollins against Chase Utley, which is not the entire deciding thing, but I think that was one way of looking at it. Parts that were complementary. But that's not really what you're asking. You're asking that broader question about why not max it out. And I see that case. I don't feel like it's how I am intending to do it, but that might be a place where you want to get guidance from the hall. Like, does it better the process to make sure we use all 10? Does it help prolong cases over the years? Or is it just sort of falsely inflating something? I think that's the question we all ask ourselves, I guess. What's your thought on it, Blair?
One thing that's going to happen, because we have the freedom to vote for as many people or as few people as we want, is a player like Alex Gordon is probably not going to go forward in the process now. I don't think he's going to get enough votes to get to 5%, which is required to continue to be on the ballot. And we'll see what happens with Lorenzo Cain, who comes on in 2 years. And, those Royals from the 14 and 15 teams are going to start popping up here in a little while. The one who I do believe will end up in the Hall of Fame at some point, Salvador Perez. He's got at least a couple of years left, it looks like, with the Royals. So his candidacy won't begin until 5 years after his final season.
Yeah, I say he's going to be in. I'll just say briefly, on the 10 players, I don't think you necessarily have to vote for 10 players. Like I said before, it's the Hall of Fame. We're not picking the 10 best players on that ballot. And it's unfortunate about Alex Gordon. I think he had a great career. He was a great Royal. Unfortunately, kind of fell off. And you could make a case that he was on pace if he'd been able to have a few more of those seasons. He was pretty phenomenal. Key part of 2 World Series teams, and one of them won a World Series championship.
And provided one of the greatest moments in Royals history.
Absolutely.
One thing that's kind of interesting, this is as of January 11th. This is a tracker. This is through MLB.com, but it tracks Ryan, I hope I pronounced it right, Ryan Thibodeau's efforts to get all the votes. There are 9 players who have yet to get a vote in the tracker.
9 of 27.
9 of 27. And Alex Gordon's one of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's either 8 or 9. So what does that say about it all? I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about just Alex, I mean, he is the perfect Royals Hall of Famer. And I think the Hall of Very Good in my eyes. Otherwise, we would have probably all voted for him, right? We understand this case, I think, in ways that outside voters wouldn't. And yet I don't quite see him there.
Clearly a college baseball Hall of Famer as well for that incredible career he had at Nebraska. So of the first-year players on the ballot, we said there were 12. I don't know who I see eventually getting into the Hall of Fame, maybe with the exception of Cole Hamels. We talked about starting pitching a little while ago and how I have a difficult time differentiating among Felix Hernandez, Mark Burley, who you mentioned, Andy Pettit, and Cole Hamels. Pitching world's changed. Starting pitching has changed in the 21st century, and numbers aren't what they used to be. I think we might have to redefine what Hall of Fame numbers are for a starting pitcher.
I agree. I think it's going to look at innings pitched is going to take on a much greater importance and strikeouts, and maybe just even games started. If you were a workhorse for somebody, you gave your team 200 innings and your ERA wasn't above 4 or something, you might have a shot. I mean, talking about former Royals are going to be coming up as Greinke and Zach Greinke, and I would think he would make it, even though he's short of 3,000 strikeouts, right? And for that very reason he was almost never hurt. He pitched a zillion innings, and he was great. Won a Cy Young in Kansas City. So, yeah, it is different. I definitely view pitching different than you would have 20 years ago, starting pitching in particular.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is at what point then do you start framing it in the context, the data of the modern tipping point? What is that year? Is it 07? Is it 14? When do we start looking at it that way? But I think that's the legitimate a highly legitimate part of this discussion is figuring out when you're talking about a different era versus when you're still making a calculation based on, the same baseline.
Right. And I'm looking at next year's Hall of Fame ballot. John Lester, it will be his first year on the ballot. Irvin Santana. There's going to be some other starting pitching that we're going to have to, if we still have votes, going to have to consider.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing. This was Vahe Gregorian and Pete Gradhoff. I'm Blair Kerkhoff of the Kansas City Star. Give me a moment, and I'll tell you what's on my radar in Kansas City sports. The area major college basketball teams look to rebound after Kansas, Missouri, and Kansas State lost on Saturday. The first opportunity comes tonight when the Jayhawks play host to Iowa State. Won't be easy for KU. The Cyclones are undefeated and ranked second in the country. The College Football Playoff Championship game is set for next Monday, January 19th. It'll be Indiana against Miami. There isn't a strong Kansas City connection on either roster, but there could be in a few months when the NFL draft begins. The Chiefs will be watching players like Miami edge rusher Ruben Bain and Indiana cornerback D'Angelo Pons, among others, but not Hoosiers quarterback Fernando Mendoza. He's expected to be the first player selected. The draft is in April. The game at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami is set for a 6:30 p.m. kickoff. And that'll do it for this week. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production team of Gabriella, Lacey, Suzanne Hogan, Irvin Zhang, and Monty Davis, and to our editors Jeff Rosen and Scott Chasen. We'll be back soon with another SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City.